take with us what we hear throughout the week, and just encourage Dad and help him to be able to get what he feels like he needs to get across clearly, and just help in every way, Lord Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Okay. We are going to read the entire book of Esther. Well, maybe not read it word for word, but pretty close. You know who Esther was? Esther was a queen. You have to watch the movie A Night with the King. It's a good movie. Now, Esther was a Jewish woman. Let's look at the first part here. The king dethrones Queen Vashti. Now, it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. Something like that. But it doesn't have any is. It's Surus. Ahasuerus. Who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. He had a big kingdom. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles, the princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. That's a party. A 180-day party. That's 6 months.
That's a whole school year.
That's a whole school year. Had a party for the whole school year. It was in college. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in the citadel. So he at first had a party for everybody in the whole kingdom. They just had a huge countrywide party for 6 months.
I wonder how many people were there.
Shows you how lavishly rich they were.
Yeah, they were very wealthy. And then at the end of that, he had a party for 7 days for all the people in the citadel, which we'll find out later on that the citadel had a lot of people because, well, you'll find out. The people who were in the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars, and the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. Yes, extravagance.
Yeah.
You know, Mediterranean extravagance. You know, it's like the ultimate. They served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance according to the generosity of the king. And in accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. That was nice of him. They didn't have to drink every time the king took a drink, which they, would have had to have done if he hadn't said, "No, everybody can just drink if they want." Could have been pretty bad. And then Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he'd been partying for 180 days, plus 7 days of flat-out feasting, drinking lots of royal wine, he commanded Mehuman, Bistha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him.
He got his way for 180 days. He didn't get his way all of a sudden.
Yeah. Well, she didn't want to come out wearing only her crown, which was probably really what it was.
Oh. Cool.
He wanted to show off how beautiful she was. So I'm pretty certain that he said, "Bring her out in her crown only." So she's like, no, I don't want to. They did things like that. So, the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner towards all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom, what shall we do to Queen Vashti, according to the law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? Memucan answered before the king and the princes. Now, this is where he said, well, you can get your... We'll read it and then I'll comment. Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes. They will report King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, and she didn't come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus, there will be excessive contempt and wrath. In other words, the queen didn't do it, so I don't have to either. And then there's going to be a bunch of unhappy people. So, his solution was, if it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered. In those days, in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, when they wrote it as law, could never be changed, could never be revoked. It was law. And if the king decreed it, it was law. And that was just how it was. So, it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree which he will make is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. Let's keep those women in mind, though. That's what he was saying, not me. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people. Now, that part right there is important to remember. Because
each man...
yeah, each man is master in his own house. That's right. Remember that. But they're in charge of their own house, and they speak in the language of their own people. And in other words, they have to follow their, it's the law that they follow their traditions. Remember that. Because in order to speak the language, there's tradition. You can't just go and learn a language and not know any of the traditions behind it, because then you don't remember the language. Okay, so after these things, when when he wasn't so mad anymore, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. And he was sad. He was like, I had a beautiful wife. Now I can't ever see her again. He said, so the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king. So he went on. So, from all over that huge kingdom, all the way from the Mediterranean down into parts of Africa, all the way over to India, they brought all the most beautiful young women to Shushan.
Did he only have one wife?
He only had one wife. He had a whole bunch of concubines. Because what they did is for 12 months, talk about taking a long time to get ready for a date.
Yeah.
They took 12 months to prepare. Mm-hmm. Now, Esther, who was also, her name was Hadassah, or Esther, her uncle, or her cousin, I guess he would have been her cousin, because it was Mordecai's uncle's daughter, so they would have been cousins. When her father and mother had died, Mordecai adopted her, and he raised her as his own. And she listened to, they were Jewish. All the Jews had been at when they were taken out of Israel, out of Judah, by the, one of the Persians or the Babylonians, not the Romans. This was way before the Romans. By the Babylonians, like when they took Daniel and all those guys out. So this was descendant after that. And so they were there. She was a beautiful young lady, a virgin, so she got taken into the king's... Now, they happened to already live in Shushan, in the citadel. And Mordecai walked, in front of the gate, and he told her, he said, don't tell them that you're Jewish. Don't tell them. She's like, okay. So she obeyed. So, for 12 months, they had beauty preparations. They had to, and they had certain things that they gave them. They would give these girls certain things. Well, the eunuch who was in charge of all the women, Esther became his favorite. So he gave her extra beauty stuff. Because he liked her. And because she was humble and not, she didn't get all stuck up like some of the other girls did. So, after 12 months, they started going in one girl a night into the king. And they could take whatever they wanted. They could go into the treasury, they could put jewels on, they could put, whatever. They dressed however they wanted to and went into the king.
But he gave her advice, too, on what the king...
Not there yet.
Oh, sorry. Well, that happened before.
No, it didn't. Not yet. So, these girls would go in, and if the king, might have liked him a little bit, but they didn't ring his bell, so to speak. He didn't, it's like, didn't float his boat. They just went back, and instead of going back to the women underneath Haggai, they went to the concubine's place. So all these girls were going over and they were just owned by the king. They were there if he needed them, wanted them, whatever, but they just lived over there. And so they kept going. Now, it was Esther's turn, and she went to the guy who was in charge of the women and he said, you can have whatever you want. She said, what do you think I should wear? What do you think I should take in there to the king? And so he prepared her. And I have a feeling that he prepared her very simply because she was already beautiful. So she went in, and the king was smitten and put the crown on her head, and she became queen. All right. Now, this was after, let's see, the third year was when Vashti made the king mad. All right. So then the fourth year, they were doing their preparation, and sometime in that fourth year or fifth year, Esther came up. So at the seventh year, I think it said it was the seventh. No, it was the fifth year. So about 6 months after Esther became queen, Mordecai was sitting in the gate of the palace, where wise men used to do that. Older men would sit and they would talk and give advice to people, and they just did that. And in Israel, they still do that somewhat. You'll see these old Jewish guys sitting around giving advice to anybody who'll listen. The old Arab guys will sit around and give advice to the young Arab guys, whatever. But they, he was sitting in there, and he heard there were two eunuchs that he overheard talking, and they were planning on attacking the king. And being, loyal, and his niece was the queen, he went and told the king. Well, he told whoever. And they investigated it and found out it was true, and they hung those two guys. Right. So that was in the 5th year. So now, and that was the end of it. He did his good deed, went on. Now, at this point in time, King Ahasuerus promoted this guy named Haman. Now, Haman was the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and he advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. So you know those 7 princes? For some reason, he liked Haman even better than all of them. So Haman was the number 2 dude. He was not the king, but he was the number 2 king, underneath the king. And all the king's servants who were with the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman. For so the king commanded concerning him. He said, if when he walks by, everybody bow down like it was me. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why you transgress the king's command? Come on, bow. Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman. So, they told him, and eventually said, Haman, we are not responsible for him not bowing down. It's not our fault. We tried. Well, we find out a little bit later that Haman is a bit of a whiner. But he got mad because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. And he's like, I'm going to get even with him. But he found out, he said, well, why won't he bow down? They said, well, because he's a Jew and they only worship their one God, and they won't bow down to anybody, and their laws say that they can't worship anybody else, and they can't bow down to anything or pay homage to anything. So, he's a Jew, and that's why he won't bow down. So Haman says, you know what? Not only am I going to even against Mordecai, I'm going to kill every Jew in the nation. Because none of them will bow down to me, and that's just not right. He was a little selfish.
I think Hitler was a descendant of him.
Well, maybe. No, actually I don't, because he didn't have any descendants left at the end of Esther. Okay, so in the first month, which is the month of Nisan, the 12th year of King Ahasuerus. So this is after 12 years. So it went from 5. In the 5th year, Mordecai said, hey, here you go. So Esther's been queen for 6 years now, 7 years. All right, so she's been queen for a while. And 7 years before that, Mordecai had saved the king's life. So in the first month of the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast Pur, that is, the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from everybody else's. And they don't keep the king's laws. How dare they? Therefore, it's not fitting for the king to let them remain. They shouldn't remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed. And I'll pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries. So he's going to pay them and then tax them on the money that he pays them. The people that kill them, that destroy the Jews. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman. Now, I've noticed that King Ahasuerus doesn't like to make the hard decisions unless he's drunk. So he gave the ring to Haman and said, you write a letter, you seal it, do whatever. Now remember, if the king said it, it was law, couldn't be changed, right? If the king's signet ring was on it, the king said it, whether he wrote it or not. Because whatever Haman wrote at that point was, he was speaking for the king. All right. Let's see. The money and the people are given to you to do with them as seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over their province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews. Not just to destroy them, not just to kill them, to destroy, kill, and annihilate. Haman was really upset that they wouldn't bow down to him. Both young and old, little children and women in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. So kill them, take everything that's theirs. Do that. So a copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being the king's command, being published for all people that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. The people in the city were going, what? Lots of places are doing that. Now, there were people who didn't like the Jews. There always have been people who didn't like the Jews. So there were people who said, all right, going to do our thing here. So, but then a lot of people were like, what? Why are we doing this? Now, when Mordecai found out about this, he was a little upset. And so he put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went and couldn't go into the gate of the castle, of the palace, because that was forbidden if you had sackcloth and ashes on. There was a dress code. So he was out in the city square in front of the palace, making a public spectacle of himself. And Esther saw him out there going, oh, Mordecai, what are you doing? So she sent a eunuch out. And he said, give this to Esther. It was a copy of the decree. Tell her that she's got to go to the king and get this taken care of. And let's see, what she spoke to and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law: put to death all. Where'd it go? Put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So it had been a month since she'd seen the king. So they told Mordecai Esther's words, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther this: do you think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than all the other Jews? For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Now, Mordecai was part of her father's house, so he knew he would die too. Yet, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? He said, maybe this is the whole reason you're there. So she answered him and said, okay, go gather all the Jews who are in the citadel, pray and fast for 3 days. And I am going to pray and fast, and all of my handmaidens are going to fast. We're all going to fast for 3 days. And then I'll go into the king. She's, a little bit scary. So Mordecai went his way and did according to Esther had commanded. Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes, so she dressed up. She didn't, she didn't skimp. She didn't, say, been married to the man for 7 years. It doesn't matter what I look like. No, she put on her royal robes, stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. Now, in the movie A Night with the King, they demonstrated this very well, because they were, having whatever. Everybody was talking, and the people that were there, and Esther shows up, and everybody goes, yeah. They'll look at the king, and he's doing something, talking, notices everybody's going, the wall's all sucked in. And he's like, looks up and he sees Esther. It's like, here. So he held out the scepter to her. And then he said, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? I'll give it to you, up to half the kingdom." Now, that was a huge kingdom. And he's like, "I'll give it to you. What do you want?" He was obviously still in love with her. Okay. So Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman," remember Haman was the number 2 man, "come today to the banquet that I have prepared for them." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." He said, "Go get Haman. I'm going to go to my wife's. She's got a banquet. We've got food. Come on. Let's go." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." Then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I'll do as the king said. Tomorrow I'll ask." She was working up a nerve, I think. She was a little bit... She didn't really know what to do. And I think God may have told her a little bit because what happens, but it's kind of cool. So, now, here's where we have to remember. Who was it who heard the plot against the king 7 years before? Mordecai had. And he spoke up and did this. Now, Haman went out that day, and he was all... the queen invited me, and the king, and we were the only ones. And he saw Mordecai in the king's gate. And he didn't stand or tremble before him. He's like... And he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. So sick of that man. I know we're going to kill all the Jews, but I'm sick of him. So, he restrained himself. He's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. He wanted to walk up to him and just punch him. He said, "No, I can't do that. That was beneath me." So he restrained himself and went home. And he sent and called for his friends and his wife, Zeresh. When Haman told them of his great riches, he bragged. He called all his friends. "Check me out, guys. Yeah, I'm the number 2 dude. Everybody has to bow down to me. The multitude. I've got all these kids. I've got all these wives. Everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he advanced him above all the officials and servants of the king. Besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared. And tomorrow I am invited by her again, along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing. It's all worthless." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "As long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." It just aggravates me. He's just irritating. He's just, I hate that man. Then his wife Zeresh and all of his friends, I'm not sure how good of friends these people were, said to him, "Let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high." Now, let's see, a cubit is about 20 inches. So what's 50 times 20? 200. 200 inches divided by 12. Let's see. 8 foot's 90 inches.
Oh, is that?
50 times 1,000.
Yeah.
So he made a tall gallows. So what's 1,000 divided by 12?
83.33333.
So, no, 83 feet high.
43.
So he made a gallows about 90 foot tall, give or take. Somewhere between 70 and 90 feet. That was a big gallows. That was really tall. He wanted everybody to see who he had hanging. So, let the gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. So, yeah, I like that. You guys could go make that. So he did it. Now, this is how God does things. It was really kind of cool. That night, the king couldn't sleep. So, as was his habit, he said, "Go get the book of go get the journals. Read to me what happened." And they said, "Okay, well, this was 7 years ago." And they read about how Mordecai the Jew had saved the king. He said, "What did we do to honor him? What did we do to thank him?" They said, "Well, nothing was done for him." He's like, "Well, that's not right." So the next morning, the king, he said, "So who's in the court?" Well, Haman had just come in. He was all brushed and ready to come in. He's like, "Yeah, I'm ready." So he was sitting there in the court waiting for the king to, say it was okay to come in, and he was ready. "Oh, there's this guy you've got. I've got this big old gallows. We got to hang him. To get rid of him because he's like an abomination." Well, so before he had a chance to say anything, though, the king said, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" He said, What should I do? What should be done for somebody that I really want to honor?" Now, Mordecai thought, who would the king delight to honor more than me? Not Mordecai, Haman. He had a big head. Big head. He said, nobody would want to honor, he wouldn't want to honor anybody more than me. I'm the number 2 guy. Of course he wants to. And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, one of your own kings, which the king has worn." So a robe that you wore, and a horse on which the king has ridden. So that's pretty big stuff. At that point in time, if you touched something that had been touched by the king, it was a no-no, but also if you were allowed to, it was like, whoa, you touched the king. Because it was like touching them. Mm-hmm. And a horse on which the king is ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Proclaim it. And the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse as you suggested, and do so for Mordecai the Jew." Who? What? If it was anime, in anime when their eyeballs go, that would have been Haman right there. Yeah. What? No way. Leave nothing undone that you've spoken. Now, the king just ordered him to do something.
And he has.
Now, what was it? That if the king said it, it was law, it was irreversible. So Haman took the robe and the horse, put it on Mordecai, looked at him and said, "Stand up." And Mordecai said, "I'm going to stand up for you." He said, "The king wants me to honor you. Please stand up." So he put the robe on him. He said, "There's a horse." Mordecai said, "I can't climb up there." And Haman said, got down on his hands and knees so Mordecai could step on his back and climb up on the horse.
Oh.
Mordecai was an old dude, So he was like, so Haman walked around. "This is what's done to the man the king delights to honor." And Mordecai said, "What?" Supposition. And somebody else said, "What? I can't quite hear you. Is that proclaiming? Aren't you supposed to be proclaiming? This is what's done to the man who the king delights to honor." I don't think he was very happy. He was a little pouty. A little bit. Sounded like a bullhorn because he was like, "This is what's done to the man who the king delights to honor." Had to walk him all around the citadel. Because that's what he did. Now, now it says, after Mordecai went back to the king, so when they're done, Mordecai came and said, "All right, take off the robe." So he took off the robe, took the horse, sent away. Mordecai went back to the king's gate, like he always did. It didn't really affect him. He's like, I have bigger things to worry about. Haman wants to kill me. And now you know that Mordecai... I have friends that are... older Jewish men, and they almost never pass up an opportunity to rub, if they'll turn the screws just a little bit. They'll rub a little bit of salt. And Mordecai, because he knew that Haman was behind the decree, and so I'm sure that he was like, we forgot that street over there. But when he was done, he was like, okay, whatever. So he went back and sat down in the King's Gate. Didn't really affect him, but other than that Mordecai, or Haman, was really upset. So after Mordecai went back to the King's Gate, but Haman hurried to his house. He was blushed and probably had his head down. He was like, mourning. He was mourning. And with his head covered, I can't believe he made me do it. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of a Jewish descent, you'll not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. They all said, guess what? We're pretty sure you messed up. So while they were still talking to him, the king's eunuchs came. Because remember, he was supposed to come to the thing. Now, the king's eunuchs, they were eunuchs, but they weren't soft and flabby. They were big, muscled. And they said, you, now, let's go. He may not even had a chance to wash his face, because he wasn't real happy. And he'd been walking around, so he was probably kind of dusty. And he was mopey and didn't have any choice but to go, and didn't quite have that same bounce in his step that he had when he came out saying, I would go to the queen and this, all that. So now they came, they got him, brought him to the banquet. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, what's your petition? Queen Esther, it shall be granted to you up to half the kingdom. It shall be done. I mean, he already said, it'll be done, whatever you want. She could have asked for anything. Queen answered and said, if I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I wouldn't have said anything. But the enemy could never compensate for the king's loss. So if we were sold as slaves, I wouldn't say anything, but our enemy could never pay the king for his loss. She knew how much the king loved her. And she knew that if she was taken away, Haman didn't realize that Esther was Jewish. And she didn't know that Mordecai was her uncle. So, he didn't realize this. And when she started talking, he's like, So the king, Ahasuerus, answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? Queen Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. And, Haman's just taking a drink of wine. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen, with good cause. The king had this history of, making rash decisions when he was upset. Then the king rose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. I can't even bear to look at him. I'm glad I can get some air. So he went out in the garden. Well, while he was out in the garden, Haman says, "Oh, Queen Esther, please have mercy." I mean, throws himself across the, she's sitting on one of those long couch things, divans or whatever they're called. Throws himself across the foot of it and across her feet. And he's like, "Oh, please have mercy on me." No. So the king came in. He's laying there. He says, "Will he assault the queen while I'm in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. That was a bad sign. They're like, put a bag over his head. You're never going to be seen again. Now, Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, "Look, there's a gallows 50 cubits high. Haman had it made for Mordecai." And remember Mordecai who spoke good on the king's behalf? Haman had it made for him. It's standing at the house of Haman right now. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. So after this, what happened was the king said to Mordecai, now remember, he had written it. It had been written and sealed with his name, which meant what? It was an unchangeable law. It was going to happen. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the enemies of the Jews were supposed to destroy, annihilate, and kill, destroy, and annihilate, whatever. So he said, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, let's have a decree. So he said, he gave Mordecai his signet ring. He said, I think you're probably more worthy of this than Haman was. Now, he'd saved her life, but Esther fell down at his feet and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite, and the scheme which he devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, if it makes you happy, and I make you happy, and you like me, and you really, really love me, let it be written to revoke the letters revised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? Then the king said to Esther and Mordecai, indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman. So everybody who was in Haman's house was now Esther's servants. His wife, his friends, his servants, his children. The house of Haman, they hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name is sealed with the signet ring, no one can revoke. So he was saying, I can't revoke that, but you can write whatever you want. So they wrote a missive that went out to all the people and said, all right, all you Jewish people, and anybody who's friends of the Jewish people, on the 13th day of the month, anybody who rises up against them, kill them. You Jewish people have permission and the right and are expected to kill anybody who rises up against you. Defend yourself, wipe them out, take what's theirs. Which is what they were planning on doing to him. So, like, all right. So they went out to everybody. By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of the people that were coming against them. They like to destroy, kill, and annihilate. They wanted to make sure they were gone. On one day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was issued, blah, blah, blah. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. Everybody liked Mordecai. That's why they were perplexed when that thing about the Jews went out. They're like, because they liked Mordecai. He was a wise man. He gave good advice. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor in every province and city. Wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because the fear of the Jews fell upon them. So they're like, these people are... Maybe I can be a Jew. Can I be a Jew? How do I become a Jew? So they became Jews. Now, so we know just about how many on the 13th day. There were still people who weren't afraid of him, and they rose up and they tried to kill him. And let's see, it says, in the citadel, in this king, Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan. And then the next day they killed 300. And altogether they killed, in the provinces, I think it said 75,000 people that came up. But the thing that was weird, is the Jewish people, they didn't take any of the plunder. They didn't touch it. They said it can go to the king. We don't care. We don't want it. We just want to live our lives, which is kind of consistent with the way they are today. Now, when Yvonne and I were there, we were in Israel. We were there at the Feast of Purim, which is a direct result of this story. Purim is you remember the lots that they cast, and they have this feast every year on the 14th and 15th of the 12th month, and it's a big party. They celebrate. They bring gifts to each other. They have their remembering. They dress up, kind of like we dress up for Halloween, but they dress up in costumes and they bring gifts. It's kind of like mixing Halloween and Christmas together. Kind of. Because they were bringing, or Easter, I don't know, because they had baskets of candy and
we saw people walking around with gifts.
Gift baskets and
Little
kids dressed up. I have a really cool picture of a little girl dressed up as an angel or something, a princess or something, but she looked like a fairy maybe.
Didn't we see a little Spider-Man?
Yeah, well, we saw a big Spider-Man and a Superman. A couple adults, college-age guys probably. But so that all happened because Esther went out. Now, how does this apply to us? Well, first of all, you never know, that person who really irritates you and aggravates you might be somebody you don't want to, take that aggravation out on. Really. And on the other hand, sometimes people get aggravated with us, and we have to remember there's someone somewhere that's going to stand up for us, like Esther did. We may not even recognize it. We may not even know it. There were people out in the provinces, a long way away from Shushan. All they knew was, on the 13th day of the 12th month, we're going to be killed, and there's no way I can leave. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of Jews that left, or tried to. But they were like, there's no way I can't leave. What am I going to do? They're going to just kill me and take everything. So they were in despair until they heard the next proclamation. Everybody was happy. So, because up until that point, they weren't allowed in this kingdom, in the Persians and the Medes, unless you were a soldier, you weren't allowed to even defend yourself. It was a capital punishment either way. If you attacked or killed somebody, and if you killed them trying to defend yourself, it didn't matter. You killed somebody. So they're like, what are we going to do? Well, this gave them permission to defend themselves, so they did. But Esther faced the king on more than one occasion. Twice he held the golden scepter out to her. The first time they made a big deal out of it. The second time, she still threw herself down in front of him, and the only reason he would have held the golden scepter out was to say, it's all right. Get out. So she still was in danger of losing her life.
If it was law already for them not to defend themselves, how did that counteract not being able to defend themselves?
They were lawyers. It wasn't that they couldn't defend themselves. It was
you couldn't kill.
There was laws that you couldn't kill. But if there was a law written that you could defend yourself against somebody doing this on a certain day, then that would, it was more specific. It was a loophole. And they were the masters of the loophole, trust me. They kind of had to be.
Yeah.
And the kings had to be careful what they said, too. So, but that's a good question. But we have to remember that. We have to think about it because, see, we will be in a place where we don't know what we're going to do. Esther didn't know what she was going to do. She was an orphan. And she was being raised by her uncle, and all of a sudden she found herself in the house of the women with all these beautiful women who probably were not the friendliest because they all wanted to be, they're all kind of, what's the word, divas. They're all like, I'm the most beautiful, I'm the best, you all are nothing. And when I'm queen, I'm going to see you put in your place. They probably had cat fights and all sorts of stuff. And so Esther was sitting there going, what did I do? And so she just talked to the guy who was in charge and said, tell me what to do and I'll do it. That's how she was that whole time.
Esther was willing to be led
Mm-hmm.
by, well, now would be for us, the Holy Spirit. God worked through these people.
Mm-hmm.
And she had to deny herself totally.
Yeah, because,
to do what, because she could have been struck dead.
I'm sure that there was a guard standing right there at the gate ready to cut her head off when she went into the king. Maybe didn't even want to, but the law's the law.
Well, that's what it said. She said, if I die, I die.
Yeah. She said, if I die, I die.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, I guess she was saying, if I'm dead, then I don't have to worry about everybody else dying. So, but I did think it was interesting how she pointed out that if we were going to be sold into slavery, I wouldn't have said anything, but the enemy still couldn't have paid back the king. See, Haman at that point didn't have a clue. He didn't know that she was Jewish. And he didn't know that what he had done was going to affect the queen, which would directly affect the king, which wasn't a real good thing to do. But he found out. So, when people try to build up things against you, like Haman did with Mordecai, they have plots to try to destroy you, which happens. Especially, at work it happens sometimes more than other times. And at school it can happen. And in friendships it can happen. People try to play each other off and they try to make somebody else look bad. They want to try to, look better than other people. That's Haman. That's just that spirit. Same thing. But when that happens, don't stop doing what you know you're supposed to do. Mordecai knew that Haman wanted to destroy him. He knew that Haman wanted to destroy the Jews. But it didn't stop him from going and sitting in the king's gate and advising people and being who he was. See, when God makes us somebody and he puts us in a place, wherever that is, just because there's opposition, don't stop. See, sometimes we have opposition and we just want to go, oh, woe is me. And we end up being more like Haman than Mordecai. Because Haman completely imagined any malice from Mordecai. Mordecai didn't care about Haman. He's like, no, I serve the living God and I don't bow down to anybody. That's just how it is. Period. And Haman could have just ignored that. He could have been happy that 99% of the population bowed down to him, but he wanted it all. He thought everybody should bow down to him except for the king. And sometimes we find ourselves in that position. We're like, well, I'm better than them. I'm better than that. They should respect me. No, not necessarily. Sometimes other people are like, well, you should respect me. And we just have to look at them and go, well, okay. I can't really obey that, but I can, sure, you're who you are. That's cool. See, sometimes we can honor people. We can be respectful of people without necessarily agreeing with them. I'm sure that Mordecai didn't dishonor Haman. He was an honorable man, so it would have been against his character to dishonor Haman. Except for maybe on that time when he had to walk him around on the horse. I have a feeling that he probably, I can't blame him. He probably delighted in that just a little bit. Knowing, seeing the steam come out of Haman's ears, and because he was upset. So Mordecai, I imagine during that little bit of time, he was probably like.
And also because Haman was really the original source of the proclamation against the Jews.
Oh yeah, he was the source of all the trouble.
So not only on the personal level, but also overall.
Well, it's kind of ironic funny, not ha-ha funny. Mordecai was actually the source of the problem with the Jews because he was obedient. And Jesus said, people hate you because of me. Haman hated Mordecai because of his love of God, because he was wanting to obey God. I'm sure that there were lots of Jews who would, as Haman would walk by, just be like, nod their head or whatever, bend down to fasten their sandal, so it looked like they were bowing down. Thinking, okay, well, I'll just fasten my sandal here. They'll think I'm bowing down, be okay. But Mordecai's like, no, I'm not dishonoring God to honor you. And I think that may be the key of what we need to remember. Sometimes the world wants us to dishonor God to honor them. Now we can respect people in the world. We can honor people in the world. We don't have to follow them. But don't dishonor God to honor somebody else.
Even when it seems like you're going to die because of it.
Yeah, even when it seems like your world's going to end. If you don't do this, then you're fired. Well, I'm sorry I can't do that because that would put me in a place of dishonoring God. That would put me in a place of dishonoring what I believe. And that's just how it is. And, and usually in that case, it's like Mordecai told Esther, relief will come from somewhere that we don't even know. And if you're honor God and you don't dishonor God to honor somebody else, He'll respect that. God will respect that. And He'll bring it out and bring salvation, so to speak. So we have to remember that. So Esther had a huge, where would all of those Jewish people have been? Most of the Jewish nation would have been. They would have been gone. Killed, annihilated, and destroyed. Because that's what they wanted to do. But Esther honored God. Esther didn't really, she didn't dishonor God, but she honored her uncle because she obeyed him. Even though it was to the point of death. See, she was willing to be led, but she was obedient. And see, the obedience is the critical thing. We have to obey God. Mm-hmm. That's right. Even when it doesn't make any sense. Even when it looks like, yep, I could be just destroyed by this. Well, like Esther said, if I die, I die.
I wonder, the Jews have had God's promise and His blessing on them always. It makes you wonder if there was a Mordecai and an Esther when Hitler killed the 12 million Jews and they weren't obedient.
Maybe.
I know it wasn't God's. He allowed it, but it wasn't His.
It wasn't His plan.
No, and you just wonder. It's so important on an everyday basis that we are in tune, so that we know if we have come to this place for such a time as this.
Mm-hmm. We have to listen and stay in tune and pay attention because we don't know when it might happen or what might happen. But we don't have any way of knowing if that one word we say or that one thing we do might change the course for hundreds or thousands or millions.
Be willing to put yourself aside, no matter what you feel or think.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter in the long run.
Sometimes you just have to put yourself aside to do what's right.
Today is Passover Sunday.
Is it? I didn't realize that.
Can you talk just a second on Passover Sunday?
Well, Passover, came from the end of right before the end of the Egyptian slavery, where the Jews were slaves in Egypt. All the plagues had gone, the frogs and the flies and the blood, the bloody water and the dead fish and all that stuff. And God, that was a case where God actually hardened Pharaoh's heart. Kept hardening it. Because Moses kept asking for less than what God really wanted him to ask for. And Pharaoh at first had offered less than what... Because Moses said, well, let me just take the people out into the wilderness for a little while. Then we'll come back. No, God said, let my people go. And eventually that's what Moses said to Pharaoh. Let my people go. And right before the last plague of the death angel, Pharaoh said, well, just take your people out in the wilderness and then come back. He said, but don't take this and that, but just take this. And God, through Moses, said, no, that's not enough. So, Passover, God said, all right, this is what you're going to do. He said, you're going to slaughter a lamb. And if you can't afford a lamb, get with your neighbor. So, take the blood of the lamb, paint it on the lintels and the doorposts. The lintel is the thing that goes across the top of the door, and the posts are on the side. He said, you're going to cook the lamb in a prescribed manner. You're going to take these herbs that are very bitter and not mix salt in with them. You're going to just leave this bitter herb. You're going to cook this in this way specifically. You're going to make this flat bread. There's no leavening. It's symbolic of being gone. You're just going to make that. And you're going to eat the Passover feast with me. You're going to eat the Passover feast. And then you're going to, close your blinds and pray. Because the firstborn of everyone in Egypt who isn't protected by the blood is going to die. Now, when the death angel who came went through Egypt, anybody who wasn't protected by the blood, the firstborn of everything in the house died. The firstborn son or daughter, the firstborn cow, the firstborn dog. It didn't matter. If it was firstborn, it died. That was a pretty heavy thing. But, God said, I want my people free. Now, the children of Israel, because they were protected by the blood, they had obeyed God. They were protected by the blood. It didn't happen to them. They didn't die. Their firstborn children didn't die. And as a result, when they came out of Goshen, which is where all of them lived, Pharaoh said, get out. And he told his people, he said, give them all your gold. Give them all the money you have. Just give it to them. We want them out. So, Passover is what God used, one, to protect the children of Israel from the angel of death, and two, to deliver the children of Israel from slavery in Egypt. That's what he used. Now, Jesus celebrated the Passover right before he died. And we have communion. We take communion because of that meal that Jesus celebrated the Passover with. And so it all ties together there, because the blood of the Lamb, Jesus was the Lamb that was slain from the foundation. That blood of the Lamb is what protects us from death. Not necessarily the death of the death angel, but the death of sin, the death of impurity, the death of whatever. The blood of the Lamb is what protects us, and Jesus' blood is the blood of the Lamb. That's why we can pray and say, Jesus, I plead your holy blood over me. Cleanse me, protect me, cover me, because of the Passover. that what you wanted to know?
Well, God is all about protecting His people,
Mm-hmm.
the Jews, and we are.
The wild
Grafted
vine
in.
grafted in.
So, I was just comparing that
Yeah.
to.
That's good. Okay. Kenny, would you pray, please?
Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord, for this day. I pray that you would bless us, Lord. I pray that you would give us your strength and your peace. Help us to understand the things that we need to understand from this message, Lord. Give us the ability to share it with others in an effective way, Lord. In your name I pray.
Amen.
Amen.
Praise God.